I was 8 years old before I ever spoke. Everyone in the Stone family said I was an idiot. Even my mother cried in secret, convinced she'd given birth to an autistic daughter. My father looked at me with disappointment every single time, though for the sake of family image, he never sent me off to a special ed school. Then one day, a man from Wall Street showed up to acquire Stone Holdings. He swaggered into our boardroom and cursed out everyone in it, until nobody could even lift their heads. Room full of high-paid executives sat there stiff and silent, scared to answer him. I stood in the corner and nearly fell asleep listening. Then I got annoyed, so I stepped forward and in his own language spoke the first sentence of this life. My name is Savannah Stone, the only direct heir of the founding branch of Stone Holdings. This should have been one of those silver spoon lives people write NB pieces about. Instead, I was 8 and still hadn't said a word. Everybody in the family knew it, that the eldest daughter of the Stone family was a fool. My mother came from one of those old Charleston families raised on books, manners, and soft voices. She was graceful, gentle, and poured every bit of her love into me. She used to hold me in her arms and teach me over and over again. Savannah, say it with Mommy. Mommy, I would only look at her and stay quiet. The light in her eyes would dim little by little. Then she'd turn away and wipe the corners of her eyes with a tissue. Thinking I didn't notice, I noticed everything. It wasn't that I couldn't speak. I just didn't want to. I had come into this life with memories from the last one. Back then, I was a financial analyst who never shut up. I spent 30 years talking, explaining, reporting, persuading, pitching. By the end of it, I was sick to death of hearing my own damn voice. So in this life, I only wanted peace. I wanted to be a useless rich girl, keep my mouth shut and enjoy the ride. What I underestimated was the weight of 5 words, heir to Stone Holdings. That wasn't a blessing. It was a collar around my neck. My father, Richard Stone, chairman of the company, was a ruthless man in business. Every time he looked at me, there was always a flicker of hope. Savannah, do you know what this is? He'd point at a set of numbers on a quarterly report. Ethan, Orth, can you tell Dad what the net profit was this quarter? I'd lift my little hand and tap the exact figure. The hope in his eyes would flare brighter. Then he'd ask the question he always wanted to ask. Savannah, say Dad. For me, I'd look at him and stay silent. Just like that, the light would go out, like fire hit by a bucket of cold water. All that remained was disappointment. Heavy, ugly, endless disappointment. He would sit there in silence for a long time, then stand and leave with a hard sweep of his sleeve, that sigh that has felt heavy enough to crack the glass walls of the whole building. I knew the truth. If I hadn't been the only direct heir of the main line, if my mother hadn't come from a family powerful enough to matter, my place in this family would have been replaced a long time ago. My cousins had stopped being afraid of me years ago. Now they just mocked me to my face. Savannah, did you understand anything in English tutoring today? That was Chloe Stone, Uncle Victor's daughter. She was only a year younger than me, but she was quick-tongued, charming, and one of my father's favorites. I gav härvan lace. Glance and kept walking. That only made her grin wider. Oh, right. I forgot. You're a born genius. You came into the world knowing everything already, unlike us poor ordinary kids who still have to study. Don't say that, said Lily Stone, Uncle Daniel's daughter, standing beside her with fake sweetness dripping from every word. Our dear cousin just doesn't think we're worth talking to. That's what people call the speech of the chosen. Coming late, right? They laughed back and forth while the house staff lowered their heads. Their shoulders still shook. They were laughing, too, at the dumb girl who couldn't speak. I walked past them with no expression at all. To me, they looked like two grasshoppers jumping around in front of my shoes, pointless and childish. My mother saw all of it. At night she held me again, and her tears soaked through my shoulder. My Savannah, why won't you talk? Just one word, just one. If I could hear even one word from you, I could die in peace. I could feel her body trembling. That was the despair of a mother. My heart wasn't made of iron. For the first time, I wavered. Maybe I should speak. I was just about to open my mouth and try to force out that awkward first syllable when hurried footsteps came pounding outside the study. Mr. Brooks, our old butler, practically stumbled through the doorway. Ma'am, bad news. The people from America are here. The Wall Street shark, Charles King. He's at the company already. My mother's face went white. Charles King, that name had hung over Stone Holdings like a storm cloud for years. He was one of Wall Street's nastiest vultures, the kind who specialized in shorting old family-run empires across the Pacific. In the last few years alone, he'd swallowed 3 companies the size of ours. What does he want? My mother asked. Mr. Brooks's voice shook. He says he's here to discuss an acquisition, but he's being outrageously disrespectful, he said. Stone Holdings should exit the stage of history with some dignity. My mother staggered and grabbed the desk. Everyone knew what discuss an acquisition really meant. It meant forced takeover in a suit and tie. A storm was coming. I looked out the window at the dirty gray sky. So much for quietly rotting in luxury. Fine. There were always a few blind flies in the world who insisted on buzzing in a sleeping lion's face. My father called an emergency meeting in the top floor boardroom and summoned every family member and core executive. I was brought along to and told to stand in the corner. That was the family rule. The eldest granddaughter had to sit in on major matters even if she didn't understand a damn thing. Usually, I just found a quiet spot and mentally checked out, but that day the air was wrong. The whole room was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Every face in there carried the same ugly shade of humiliated anger. My father sat at the head of the table, his face dark enough. Tupocha. Standing across from him was a tall, middle-aged man in a custom suit, gold-rimmed glasses, predatory eyes, the kind of face that looked expensive and cruel at the same time. Charles King, a Wall Street crocodile in human skin. Mr. Stone, he said, is this really how you receive a guest? His tone dripped with mockery. I spent 14 damn hours getting here from New York. This is what you put in front of me. He raised one long finger and pointed at the executives around the room. A bunch of spreadsheet nerds. I talk capital. You talk feelings. I talk market law. You talk family legacy. Honestly. He laughed. It's pathetic. The sound bounced off the polished walls of the boardroom and scraped across every nerve. In the room, Mr. King, our CFO. Mr. Walker shot to his feet, shaking with rage. This is the boardroom of Stone Holdings. You will not behave like this. Here. Charles glanced at him sideways, full of contempt. Walker, right? I remember you. You're the one who told me yesterday that family businesses have warmth. He leaned forward. Let me tell you how Wall Street defines warmth. Armed without profit is the temperature of a grave. Only weak people use emotion to cover up incompetence. Mr. Walker's face turned the color of liver. He pointed at Charles, mouth opening and closing, and then nearly collapsed backward from sheer rage. Mr. Walker. Several people lunged to catch him. The room erupted in panic motion. My father slammed a hand on the table. That's enough. Charles settled back a little, but the sneer never left his face. I gave my father a lazy little nod. Mr. Stone, I won't waste more time. Our Funds Decision Committee has already concluded that your stock won't survive. Next year, if you sell now, maybe you get $3 billion. If we start shorting you in earnest, you'll be lucky to keep one. And by the way, we want that south side waterfront parcel. It's perfect for a high-end residential development. Oh, and I hear your tech team is solid. We like to poach them as a whole unit. He didn't even get to finish before the room exploded. A lowball acquisition, a land grab, and they wanted to strip our core team too. This wasn't a negotiation. This was butchery. This is outrageous. Throw this bastard out. We should fight him on this. A few hot-headed shareholders on my second uncle's side were already halfway out of their seats. Charles let out a cold laugh. Fight me? Sure. He turned to Uncle Victor. You're the second brother, right? 3 years ago, the real estate Project ULED. How much did that lose? 200 million? 3. Uncle Victor's face went red in an instant, like he'd been slapped. Rob Bain stood out on his clenched fist, but not a word came out. Charles turned to another executive. And you, head of marketing, enter code in Macaroon app to get full text. Free. Tutorial in pin video. Charles King didn't even wait for the marketing director to stutter out a defense. Your acquisition costs have doubled in 2 quarters. You're burning capital on legacy media while your competitors are eating your market share alive. Don't look at me like I'm the villain. I'm the Undertaker. I'm just here to measure the coffin. He laughed again, a harsh, grating sound that made my skin crawl. The silence in the boardroom was absolute. My father's knuckles were bone white as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table. Uncle Victor was staring at the floor, sweating through his custom Italian suit. And then I got annoyed, really deeply annoyed. I had spent 30 years of my past life dealing with arrogant, over-leveraged frat boys in bespoke suits who thought reading a Bloomberg terminal made them masters of the universe. Charles King wasn't a crocodile. He was a textbook vulture, capitalizing on fear, and his math was sloppy. I pushed off the oak paneling of the corner wall, my little patent. Leather shoes made a soft click, click, click on the hardwood floor as I walked toward the center of the room. Heads turned, frowns formed. Savannah, what are you doing? Uncle Victor hissed, glad for a distraction from his own humiliation. Someone get the child out of here. I ignored him. I walked right up to the end of the massive table, directly in Charles King's line of sight. He looked down at me, an eyebrow raised in mild, patronizing amusement. Is this the famous mute heiress? Charles sneered, glancing at my father. Look at this, Richard. Your company is sinking, and you're relying on a disabled child for moral support? I'm doing you a favor, taking the circus off your hands. I took a breath. I hadn't used these vocal cords for anything more than breathing and coughing in 8 years. I hoped my voice wouldn't crack. I looked dead into his predatory eyes, and in his own language, the cold, bloodless language of Wall Street, I spoke the first sentence of his life. My name is Savannah Stone, the only direct heir of the founding branch of Stone Holdings. My voice was small, high-pitched, unmistakably that of an 8-year-old child, but the cadence, the flat, deadpan delivery, the utter lack of intimidation that belonged to a 30-year veteran of the financial trenches. The room froze. I mean, literally froze. Mr. Walker, the CFO, dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the wood, rolling off the edge and hitting the floor. My father stared at me, his mouth slightly parted, his eyes wide with shock so profound he looked like he'd been struck by lightning. I didn't give them time to process it. I kept my eyes locked on Charles. 3 billion, I said, rolling the number around my tongue like bad wine. A lowball offered based on our Q2 EBITDA, completely ignoring the unreleased patents our tech team finalized last month. You want the South Side waterfront parcel because, you know, the city zoning board is passing the rezoning ordinance next Tuesday, turning it from commercial to ultra-luxury residential. Its valuation will triple overnight. Charles King's patronizing smile vanished. His jaw went slack. You threatened to short us to death. I continued, pacing slowly, my hands clasped behind my back in a perfect imitation of my old managing director. But let's look at your fund, Mr. King. Apex Capital, right? You're heavily leveraged in the Asian tech sector, which took a massive hit last week. Your LP investors are getting nervous. Your liquidity is drying up. You don't want to acquire Stone Holdings because we're weak. You want to acquire us because we are asset-rich and debt-free. You need our cash reserves to cover your margin calls before your own investors realize you're bleeding out. I stopped right in front of him, tilting my head. You aren't a crocodile, Mr. King. You're a stray dog begging for a bone, trying to bark loud enough so we don't see you starving. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush diamonds. Charles King's face flushed a violent, ugly crimson. He looked around the room, expecting someone to say this was a prank, a script they had fed the kid. But the executives were staring at me with the exact same horror he felt. Who the hell? Charles hammered, his polished veneer cracking. Richard, what is this trick? It's not a trick, Charlie. I cut in, not letting him regain his footing. It's a rejection. Stone Holdings isn't selling. Furthermore, if you dare to initiate a short position against our stock, tomorrow morning I promise you we won't just defend, we will squeeze you until your fund is nothing but a cautionary tale taught to first-year analysts at Wharton. Get out of my boardroom. For a second I thought he might hit me, his fists clenched, but the sheer surrealism of being verbally dismantled by an 8-year-old girl in a pinafore dress broke his psychological dominance. He snatched his briefcase from the table. You're going to regret this, Richard, he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at my father. When your stock is trading for pennies, don't come crying to me. He stormed out. The heavy double doors slammed shut behind him. I stood there for a moment, enjoying the absolute quiet. Then I turned to face my family. Uncle Victor was pale. Cousin Chloe, who had sneaked in to watch the proceedings, was staring at me as if I had grown a second head. My father was slowly standing up from his leather chair, trembling. Savannah, my father whispered. His voice was hoarse. The disappointment that had clouded his eyes for 8 years was gone, replaced by a terrifying, consuming awe. You can speak. I always could, Dad, I said, dropping the corporate sharpness and softening my tone just a fraction. I just didn't have anything worth saying. Until now. Suddenly, the side door of the boardroom burst open. My mother had been waiting in the adjacent lounge, listening through the intercom. She flew across the room, falling to her knees on the hardwood floor right in front of me, grabbing me by the shoulders. Tears were streaming down her face, ruining her immaculate makeup. Savannah, my baby, she choked out, her entire body shaking. I looked at her, my heart, walled off by years of cynical detachment, cracked just a little. I lifted my small hand and wiped away a tear rolling down her cheek. Mom, I said quietly, don't cry anymore. Nobody is going to bully our family. I won't let them. She pulled me into a crushing hug, sobbing uncontrollably. The executives in the room awkwardly looked away, wiping their own eyes. Even Mr. Walker was sniffling. My father walked over, kneeling beside my mother, wrapping his large arms around both of us. For the first time in my life, we felt like a family. But the touching moment was brief. We had a war to win. I gently pulled back from my mother's embrace and looked at my father. Dad, tell the board to sit down. We have less than 12 hours before the market opens in New York, and King is going to hit us with everything he has. My father didn't hesitate. He didn't question my age or the impossibility of the situation. He recognized a lifeline. When he saw one, he stood up, his spine straight, the ruthless chairman once again. Sit down, all of you, he barked. The executives scrambled to their seats. Uncle Victor lingered, looking sullen and terrified. Richard, are we really going to take financial advice from a child? She just antagonized a Wall Street titan. I didn't even look at Victor. I looked at the CFO. Mr. Walker, what is our current liquid cash reserve? Walker fumbled with his iPad, his fingers shaking. 400 million, miss. Savannah. Not enough, I said, walking over and pulling up a chair next to my father. I dragged it closer to the table, climbed up, and sat cross-legged so I could see over the mahogany expanse. King will borrow millions of shares to dump on the market tomorrow. We need a massive capital injection to buy up everything he sells. We're going to trigger a short squeeze. A short squeeze? Walker swallowed hard. Miss Savannah, if we fail, we'll bankrupt the company. We won't fail, I said coldly. Dad, call Grandpa in Charleston. Mother's family has deep pockets and old money. Tell him Stone Holdings is offering a private placement of preferred shares at a 10% premium, but we need 600 million wired into our brokerage accounts by 8 a.m. My mother gasped. My father, but Richard. And he have never they will today, I said. Money doesn't hold grudges, Mom. It only seeks returns. Dad, tell him the South Side rezoning is guaranteed, and we'll cut him in on the waterfront development. My father looked at me, a sharp, hungry smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a wolf. Realizing it had birthed a monster, get me a secure line, he ordered his assistant. The next 48 hours were a blur of caffeine, screaming phones, and pure adrenaline. When the market opened on Monday, Charles King made good on his threat. Apex Capital dumped millions of borrowed Stone Holdings shares into the market. Our stock price plummeted. Panic set in on the trading floor. Financial news networks began running segments on the fall of the Stone Empire. Uncle Victor was pacing the boardroom, screaming that we were ruined. Chloe and Lily huddled in the corner, glaring at me with a mixture of terror and blame. It's dropping, Savannah, my father said, tightly watching the red numbers flash on the massive screen at the front of the room. Down 15%. Wait, I said, sipping on a juice box. I sat in a massive leather armchair, my feet dangling inches from the floor. Down 22%. Walker panicked. Miss Savannah, we have to intervene. Not yet, I replied calmly. Let him get overconfident. Let him borrow more. Dig the grave deeper. At 1 p.m., the stock was down 30%. Apex Capital had shorted 40% of our public float. It was an astronomical, reckless amount of leverage. King was trying to kill us in a single day. Now, I said, dropping the empty juice box on the table. Dad, release the tech. Patents to the press. Announce the South Side rezoning. And Mr. Walker, take that $1 billion of cash we pulled and buy back every single share on the open market order, sweep the book. Executing, Walker said, his voice trembling with a terrifying thrill. At 1:15 p.m., the news broke. Unprecedented battery efficiency patents secured by Stone Holdings, prime real estate, rezoned. At 1:20 p.m., our massive buy orders hit the market. The stock didn't just rebound, it exploded. A short squeeze is a violent, beautiful thing to watch when you're on the right side of it. When a stock price shoots up, short sellers like Charles King are forced to buy shares to cover their borrowed positions or face infinite losses. Their forced buying drives the price up even higher, creating a feedback loop of pure financial slaughter. On the screen, the red line turned green. It shot upward at a 90 degrees angle, up 10% up. Trading was halted due to volatility. When it unhalted, it gapped 50%. Charles King wasn't just losing his profit, he was losing his fund's capital. By 3:45 p.m., right before the closing bell, the Phone in the boardroom rang. It was a direct line. My father picked it up, put it on speaker, and set it in front of me. Richard. Charles King's voice came through. It wasn't smooth anymore. It sounded like a man drowning. Richard, tell your broker to stop buying. Oui. Can't negotiate. I leaned over the table. Mr. King, I said, my childish voice, echoing in the dead silent room. House. The temperature of the grave? A strangled noise came from the other end. Savannah, listen to me, you little brat. You're going to destroy the broader market. I told you I'd squeeze you until you were a cautionary tale. I interrupted. Tomorrow morning the margin callers are going to liquidate. Apex Capital, you're going to lose your fund, your Hampton house, your yacht, and probably your wife. You'll be barred from trading securities for the rest of your natural life. Please, he actually sobbed. The great Wall Street crocodile, crying over a speakerphone to an 8-year-old. I have LPs. I have Russian money in this fund. They'll kill me. Then I suggest you start running. I said, have a nice life, Charlie. I reached out and pressed the end call button. The boardroom erupted. Executives were cheering, hugging, throwing papers into the air. Mr. Walker was openly weeping with joy. My father picked me up under the arms and spun me around, laughing louder and harder than I had ever heard him laugh. We had made nearly $2 billion in paper profit in 4 hours. More importantly, Stone Holdings was untouchable, but while the external threat was dead, I knew the internal rot was still festering. Later that evening, as the victory champagne was being poured in the executive lounge, I sat in my father's office. The door was locked. Just me, my dad, and the thick, heavy silence of true power. You knew my father said softly, pouring himself a glass of scotch. He looked at me not as a daughter, but as a peer. You've understood everything we've done in this company since you were old enough to walk. Yes, I said. Why the silence? Because talking is exhausting, Dad. And people who talk too much reveal their weaknesses. I wanted peace. I looked at him, but I realized that peace isn't given. It has to be secured. And what do we need to secure it? He asked. I pulled a manila folder from his desk drawer, one I had directed Mr. Brooks to intercept earlier that afternoon. I slid it across the desk to him. Uncle Victor, I said flatly, during the dip. At noon, he panicked sold his entire 5% stake to an offshore shell company. He tried to dump his shares to save his own skin, assuming we would go bankrupt. He didn't realize the shell company was secretly controlled by Mr. Walker on my orders. My father opened the folder. His eyes scanned the transfer documents. The joy of the afternoon vanished, replaced by a cold, murderous fury. Betrayal within. The family was the one thing he did not tolerate. Victor sold us out. My father growled. He did. And by doing so, he forfeited his right to sit on the board. I said, call a family meeting tonight. Strip him of his shares, his titles, and his dividends. Banish him to the subsidiary office in Midwest. Uncle Daniel, too. He was CC'd on the emails. They're cowards, Dad. Dead weight. My father looked at me, a shadow passing over his face. They're my brothers, Savannah. They are parasites, I corrected. If Charles King had won today, Victor would have offered you up on a silver platter. To keep his country club membership. Cut. The rot out, Dad, or I will do it myself. When I take over. He stared at me for a long time. Then, he slowly closed the folder and nodded. It will be done. The purge of the Stone family was swift and brutal. That night in the grand foyer of our estate, my father laid the evidence on the glass coffee table. Uncle Victor wept, begged, and threatened, but it was useless. Uncle Daniel tried to distance himself, but the paper trail I had Mr. Walker uncover tied him to embezzled funds from 3 years prior. Within an hour, both branches of the family were stripped of their executive power. They were allowed to keep a modest trust fund, enough to live comfortably, but they would never set foot in Stone Holdings headquarters again. As they packed their bags to leave the estate that very night, I stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down. Cousin Chloe and Cousin Lily stood in the foyer, their designer bags piled around them. Their previous arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the red-eyed, snot-nosed reality of a spectacular fall from grace. Chloe looked up and saw me. She flinched, instinctively taking a step back. She wasn't looking at the dumb girl anymore. She was looking at the executioner. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. I just gave her that same lazy glance I had given her in the hallway days ago, turned around and walked back to my room. 10 years later, the rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office in Manhattan. I sat in a high-backed leather chair, staring out at the gray, sprawling skyline of Wall Street. I was 18 now, officially the CEO of Stone Holdings. My father had retired to a consulting role, happy to spend his time on golf courses and taking my mother on the vacations she had always deserved. My mother had finally stopped crying. Her days were now filled with hosting charity galas, her head held high, proud of the daughter who had saved the family. The company had grown tenfold since the Apex Capital incident. We owned the tech sector. We owned the waterfront. We were an empire. A soft knock came at the door. My assistant, a sharp young graduate from Harvard, stepped in. Miss Stone, the executives from Morgan Stanley are here for the merger meeting. They seem a bit nervous. I smirked, taking a sip of my black coffee. The memory of my past life, of the exhaustion and the endless talking, felt like a distant dream now. I had found my peace, not by hiding from the world, but by conquering it so thoroughly that no one dared to disturb me. Let them sweat for 5 minutes, I said, my voice smooth, calm, and carrying the absolute weight of a king. Then send them in. I turned my chair to face the door, resting my chin on my steepled fingers. They used to say the eldest daughter of the Stone family was a fool who couldn't speak. Now, when I opened my mouth, the whole world held its breath.